Good evening on such a gorgeous, warm spring evening. I actually took my coat. I was running around town and dispensed with the coat today. It was so warm. And such a great group, such a great crush of people for the Murdock Society at our very first gathering for 2016. The inimitable Tony Gates crafted a fabulous fall Murdock party that she called Dare to Discover. You know, many of us were part of that fun night, but those words, Dare to Discover, gave me a bright thought and a spark for a theme that we would have across the different speakers that we have this year, which is how in the visual arts and how in art museums we define innovation today. And when I hit on innovation, about 2 beats later, I absolutely knew that we needed to have Leo Villareal come and speak. So I'm thrilled that he accepted the offer. I would say of the several international artists working today, Leo is recasting really what art means and helping to recraft it, really embracing the power of technology and all that means and how you can really capitalize on technology in a whole new way to mesmerize us. He, I would say, is as innovative and inventive as they come. And really his work, as you'll see, for those of you who really aren't that familiar either with him or his work, I find it poetic and lyrical, and typically I'm just wholly captivated by it. So I want to acknowledge not only that Leo Villareal is here, but Sandra Gearing is here. His dealer from New York City came on the trip to accompany him. So if you didn't meet her at the cocktail hour, please help to welcome her over the dinner. So, and I also want to sort of share in the room that the Wichita Art Museum is in conversation with Leo Villareal for the possibility of one of his light sculptures in our new art garden. And I would say that makes this evening that much more exciting. Stay tuned for updates and pester me with a zillion questions about that particular project. At any rate, part of why we think about talking to Leo for a piece here in Wichita, you'll see from his presentation, he became fascinated by the 20th century engineer, inventor, futurist Buckminster Fuller. Fuller actually lived in Wichita from 1944 to 1946. He was fondly called Bucky, and I'm looking for Mary Lynn Oliver. I know here she is in the crowd. It was actually Mary Lynn's father, Walter Beach, who brought Buckminster Fuller to Wichita. A couple of people may remember the Dymaxion house, the Wichita house that Bill Graham had, and Beach Aircraft had Buckminster Fuller here to help think about, all right, well, the Americans were now in the war, and we were going to win that war, and I have all these fabulous metal workers in aviation, and what on earth are we going, how are we going to re-engineer our company? And they were branching out into various different things. Buckminster Fuller had been involved in housing, and specifically in prefab aluminum housing. It was a project that was brilliant and never got off the ground in Wichita. But still interesting that he was here at such an incredible moment. And many people may be familiar with geodesic domes. Not 100% invented by Buckminster Fuller, but fine-tuned and popularized by him. So you'll see that connection in Leo's presentation. Fuller remains a very inspirational figure to artists and designers and architects really, cross time and through today. As a matter of fact, the Whitney Museum of American Art did an exhibition in 2008 specifically on how Buckminster Fuller was continuing to inspire visual artists. And, I say, darn, they should have waited a couple of years, because then Leo's project could have been part of it as well. So let me transition and share just a few things about Leo. He grew up in El Paso. His undergrad was in sculpture from Yale University. He has a graduate degree in interactive telecommunication from NYU. The San Jose Museum of Contemporary Art organized both a national touring show in 2010, but accompanying really wonderful exhibition catalog. So he's got a monograph. He told us when we were visiting today that he launches about once a month. He launches a new commission project. So this is a very active, amazing artist. If you've been to these museums in recent memory, you've probably seen some of his light sculptures, and that would include the National Gallery of Art, the Johnson Museum of Art that's at the Cornell University campus, finished recently Bleecker Street subway station in New York, and he did a project that is certainly his largest scale project with, I think, the largest international impact, and that is bay lights on the span of the San Francisco to Oakland Bay Bridge that soon we're going to hear all about. But I'm thinking, on the list of places that the Murdock Society is thinking about for a trip, well, maybe we should go to San Francisco and see this bridge. Anyway, Leo, welcome to the stage.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction and the warm welcome. It's very happy to be here in Wichita and to be able to share a little bit of my work with you all. I guess I got my start way back when in sculpture, and I'll talk a little bit about where my work came from. I studied installation sculpture at Yale, and I was working with a lot of found objects and spaces, and just after Yale, I ended up going to Italy, and I did a summer internship at the Peggy Guggenheim collection, and was living in Venice, and I was invited to come see the Count Panza's collection of minimal art in Varese, and it was my first experience with Dan Flavin and James Turrell, and seeing Panza's stables and seeing all this work installed was a really kind of transformative moment for me, and I realized that art could be much more reduced than what I had known previously. My family is, I grew up in El Paso, but a lot of my family is from Marfa, Texas. My great-great-grandfather was driving his cattle across the country, and that's where he stopped in 1890, and he became one of the founders of Marfa and a quite successful rancher. So it was interesting for me in college when I realized that Donald Judd had come to Marfa in the 70s and had bought a lot of the, Fort D.A. Russell and some of the other buildings and turned it into a space to permanently exhibit not only his work, but his, Dan Flavin, which we see here, and some of the barracks that are at Chinati. This is some of Judd's aluminum cubes, which are there, beautifully installed permanently. Some of his outdoor concrete works. So that was quite a collision for me. The other, after I finished at Yale and I'd been traveling to Italy, I was trying to decide what should I do next. Should I go to art school? Should I go to film school? And I found a program at NYU called the Interactive Telecommunications program this was started there in 1992, and at that point there was no web, so it was very early days for this technology stuff. But I was intrigued by the idea of virtual reality and what you could do with these new tools. And so I immersed myself in that, and I got involved in programming and video editing and creating virtual reality and all sorts of technological things. And I finished there in 1994, and Michael Neymark, who we see here, is an amazing artist who studied at MIT, and his obsession is in capturing place. So he created this special camera apparatus, stereoscopic camera, and he would drive this around and capture a series of stereoscopic stills. So Michael asked me to come out and be his intern in Palo Alto at a place called Interval Research that Paul Allen had founded, and it was his own private think tank, kind of a Xerox PARC, but without the Xerox. So, an amazing gathering of programmers and engineers were combined with artists and musicians and designers, and it was very kind of utopian and see what would develop from all of that. So I spent the summer of '94 out there working with Michael, and this is some of the work we did. We took these stereoscopic stills, these pairs, but then started to dimensionalize them using the computer. So we were creating images or spaces that the camera had never actually seen. And this was a pretty radical thing to be doing 20 years ago. Today it's being done right and left with the Kinect cameras and generating 3D models. And at that point, Paul Allen was fairly nonverbal, and the best thing that could happen in a demonstration is that he would say, "Cool." So when he saw this work that we had done, he said, "That's incredible." So everyone was very excited about the possibilities. So from there, I ended up moving back to New York, establishing my studio. I found that combining software and light was incredibly powerful. I'm going to jump forward here because we could be here all night if I kept talking to you about all the process and everything. But what I started creating was light sculpture. And it started in my studio. I started having some shows with Sandra and other group shows in New York, and slowly found my way to making public sculpture. So this is one of the most well-known pieces I've done at the National Gallery of Art. And this is a tunnel that was created by I.M. Pei in the 70s to link the east and west buildings. So the metal slats and the curve were all existing, but it was, even according to Pei's office, somewhat unresolved. It was dark, and I was asked by Molly Donovan, a curator at the National Gallery, to think about what we could do to activate the space. So I proposed installing 41,000 white LED lights in the gap between these metal slats. And at first there was a lot of concern about 41,000 lights, and are people going to have seizures, and what's going to happen? So I had to do some explaining, and that I was using light in a very different way, in a soft and elegant manner. And what you see here are sequences that are created by our custom software. For over 10 years I've been developing my own software with a team of programmers. And we generate these sequences, so I'm not using any video or any imagery, and there's no text in my work. My work is firmly rooted in abstraction. So you get these. There's a playful quality to the work, and I'm interested in physics and in underlying rules and things that we know in nature. So the sequences feel very familiar, and you connect with them, and you feel a sense of connection, which is really the most important part. And I like this idea in this space at the National Gallery that you're already going on a voyage. You're traveling through on this moving walkway. But my early work had been in virtual reality, so I'm always interested in creating these vehicles and things that could transport you beyond just literally moving on the walkway. This became another layer of being able to take people somewhere through this very simple means of the sequence light. So the piece at the National Gallery was supposed to be up for 1 year. At the end of the year, everyone had really fallen in love with the piece, and I was asked if they could keep it permanently, which of course I was thrilled. So now they have about 5 million visitors a year that enjoy this piece. Some people come for their lunch breaks and spend the entire time just going back and forth on the moving walkways. So it's their moment of zen and kind of calm thing. But there it is, and right at the end of the hall, there's an amazing Richard Serra sculpture and a Sol LeWitt wall drawing, and so it's very much connected to the history of abstraction and art. It just happens to be using a very new kind of material, which is software and light. This is another installation I did at the Johnson Museum up in Ithaca at Cornell University. It's another Pei building from the 70s, and kind of a stunning piece of architecture. I was asked to do something with the building, and how could we activate it in some way? So I proposed creating a grid of white LED lights above a sculpture court. So we installed this grid of lights, and with great care and sensitivity. I'm interested in augmenting what's there and not just using the building as a pedestal and putting something on it that doesn't make sense. So we took great pains to powder coat our metal just the right color of the building. We weren't allowed to perforate the building in any way. But it really activated the building in a way that was different and changed the way people use the building and see the building. What was exciting is that the Johnson Museum is right next to the engineering department and across from the architecture department and the art department. But my piece fuses all these disciplines in a very unique way. So I was thrilled to have it in an academic environment in which people are learning, and this is a new hybrid form. So it's there, and again, was intended to be temporary, but now has become permanent, which is a kind of a trend. People tend to fall in love with my work, which is nice. And it's, you see it down from below. The sequences were inspired by the kinetic activity of the gorges and the waterfalls and all the things that were moving around in the site. Here you can see the campus and some of the more traditional architecture. But it's really a wonderful thing to be able to install pieces in places like these wonderful buildings and these sites that it activates it, it changes it. People sit down in front of the piece and have picnics, which is kind of incredible. And I should say that the patterns the sequences that I'm displaying here are non-repeating. They're displayed in a random order and for a random amount of time. So it's not generative. It's not making new things that I've never seen, because I don't trust my software to look good all the time. I'm the one there waiting for that 1% of the time that something compelling happens and capturing those moments, and that's what gets presented on the pieces. But it's very layered. These pieces are monochrome. I have 255 levels of brightness that I can adjust per LED. So there's a grayscale, there's an element of a foreground layer, background layer. But very exciting to be able to work in spaces like the Johnson Museum. This is a piece I did at Gehring Lopez Gallery in New York. This is a piece called Cylinder, and this is thousands and thousands of white LEDs embedded in mirrored stainless steel rods. And the rods hang from a disc, and they float just above the floor. So I was interested, and I was thinking about the National Gallery, and how could I take that piece, Multiverse, and distill that down into something that could work in a gallery. And this was the answer. And I'd been working to this point very much in wall-mounted pieces where I was dealing with 2 dimensions, X and Y. But the exciting thing here was getting into the 3rd dimension, so Z, and really making these layered volumetric works. So here you can see the way that the piece floats just above the floor, and all the reflections and the shadows are a very exciting element. So there's a lot of unknown parts to these works. So I'm interested in the idea of artificial life and emergent behavior, which sounds complicated and fancy, but all it really means is when you're setting up certain circumstances and waiting for that 1% of the time when something compelling happens, then capturing those moments. So I'm harvesting those moments and building them into more elaborate sequences, and that's what you see displayed on the pieces. We'll see a view looking back up at the top of the disc, which is mirrored again. So there's this aspect of the infinite, and creating these experiences which are you feel transported, and but through a very simple means. This is a commission I did at the Bleecker Street subway station in New York City. This is the first piece of digital art that the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, has commissioned. And they have a very amazing program called Arts for Transit. So there's a lot of amazing work down in the subway, and it's obviously as public as you can get. And this piece is a hexagonal array that hovers just over people's heads. So these tubes are made of polycarbonate. They have color LEDs inside, and each 1.2 inches can be any of 16 million colors. So there's a tremendous variety, and it's right there on the train track. So people are really connected to it. And I was interested in thinking about the transportation network as a system and abstracting that in a way and moving light across this hexagonal array. And there are different granularities where you see certain groups of hexagons activated, then certain paths, then certain sides of certain hexagons. But activating it is one of the things that I do. And it's not just about the form geometrically, it's really about moving light across it. So there's a temporal element in my work, and every piece involves time. Here's the piece Buckyball, which is at Madison Square Park. Let's see, I'm not sure why this isn't. Oh, there we go. Madison Square Park is a wonderful park right in the center of Manhattan on 23rd Street, and it's right off Fifth Avenue. And it's bills itself as an outdoor museum or art gallery. And I was asked to think about, I'd been working with Martin Friedman, who was the legendary director of the Walker Art Center in the 60s, and Martin became a fan of my work and asked me to think about Madison Square Park and what could be done. And Madison Square Park is filled with equestrian statues and very traditional sculpture. And I was thinking about this buckyball. I'd seen the form of a buckyball in the New York Times Science magazine and had been very intrigued by these hexagons and pentagons and then wrapped into a sphere. And it's a building block in nanotechnology that was discovered by scientists at Rice University in the 80s. And it was named after Buckminster Fuller. And it's a building block that you see in the nano scale. But I wanted to take something that was invisible to the naked eye and make it monumental and large. So we put it on a pedestal in the way that the other sculptures in the park were, and we actually put two buckyballs. The outer one is 20 feet in diameter, and the inner one is 10 feet. So I wanted two of these forms that could communicate, and we nested them. So there's an activation from the inside to the outside, and light moves forward and back. It's a very social space. There's the famous Shake Shack, which is right there in Madison Square Park. And I created these zero-gravity couches, which are almost like park benches, but you recline in them, and it's a kind of ideal position from which to view the buckyball. So people could lay in them and look back at the ball. This piece opened 3 days before Hurricane Sandy in New York, so I had these visions of the buckyball rolling down Fifth Avenue. And, fortunately, that did not happen. I called my engineers, and they said, no, it's fine, and the big concern is other things hitting it, like tree limbs, but none of that came to pass. The sculpture did very well in the storm. And Alice Walton from Crystal Bridges came to see the piece, and it was always our intention that the buckyball should travel. So we sent it down to Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas, and it was a really exciting moment to see it transition from the center of Manhattan to a field in Arkansas. But it's right at the entrance of the museum, and they, after spending a few months with the piece, decided that they wanted to keep that permanently. So there it is in Bentonville, and enjoyed by many. So the piece is, it's something that draws people together. It's abstract, but it really is, has a very positive energy that draws people together. You don't see people in the chairs because it's probably about 5 degrees in New York. But if it weren't that cold, it would be packed. So you can see that even in the day, the piece had a nice presence and is surrounded by, the beautiful buildings. I have a few other photos of the piece. And it's nicely kind of nestled within the context of the city. Some views from above. And again, it goes through a randomized sequence of patterns, and it's ever changing. So that brings me to, let's see here, I missed one, I think. There we go. This brings me to the Bay Lights, which is an incredible piece. I was asked to think about the Bay Bridge as a canvas, and what would I do? And I've often asked to think about different things and create simulations in the computer, and most of the time these things don't come to pass, and I thought the chances of this actually happening were very slim. But I still spent several months thinking about it and generating this 1-minute animation in the computer. So I used Photoshop and After Effects and some 3D tools to make this, and I made this myself. And started showing it to some people at Caltrans that own and operate the bridge. And they got very excited about it. And I think it was important to show them what the piece could look like, because you can say we want to put lights on the bridge, and that means different things to different people. But when you actually show what it could look like, it's very powerful. And we thought, well, maybe we could get a permit to actually do this piece. So the first step was the animation here. And then the second was to actually go and take a look at the bridge and see, what we could do and where we could do it. Because the western span of the Bay Bridge it's an enormous structure. It's 1.8 miles long, and the towers are 525 feet tall. And there's not a whole lot up there. So we went and they gave us all harnesses, and they told us that the harness had a shock absorber in case I did fall, that I wouldn't break my back. So I was excited about that. So here we are taking a cable walk up to the top of the bridge. So we go on the lower deck and climb up a very kind of sketchy ladder. And then we're attached at 2 points. And I was actually blown away by the beauty of the site. I mean, the way the light interacts with the surface of the water, and the atmosphere, and the traffic, and here you see Alcatraz. But it was very, very inspiring, and I kept thinking, how can I describe this to my programmer? Because I want to recreate what I'm seeing, but from the ground up using software, which is the way I think about things. So not just taking an image, but really recreating it. So here I am, we were with a photographer from the New York Times Magazine who asked me to kind of lean back on one of the cables. So I did it, had to take a lot of deep breaths, but fortunately I'm not afraid of heights, and it made a great story. So then the question was, well, how do we do this? And we found some lighting technology from Philips, which a company I've worked with very closely for many, many years. This is an LED node that comes on a string, and these are these power supplies, and all the stuff is rated at, it's called IP66, which is for wet and damp locations. Then we had to figure out how to attach each of these lights to the suspender cables of the bridge, so we created models, 3D printed a lot of these clips. I had to do a lot of problem solving. And then the answer from the engineers, we worked with Parsons Brinkerhoff to do our technical design. So the answer was that we were going to zip tie these things onto the suspender cables, and I was shocked that that's what it was, but that's how they're held up there. Fortunately, we used UV-resistant zip ties that don't pop off after about a year. But there they were. We went through a very elaborate process, a very 5-month installation of getting the work up there, and I couldn't really put a curtain over the bridge and do my work and then unveil it. So I had to be okay with revealing the process to everyone and all the glitches and all the things that we had to go through. So for months and months, I sat in front of the bridge, connected live with my laptop, which was very exciting. And when people realized I was controlling the bridge live, there was I have 30 people around me, and everyone was extremely excited. But finally, on March, after 2.5 years from the initial idea to completion, on March 5th of 2013, we premiered the Bay Lights. And this is footage of what it actually looks like. And nothing can really encapsulate it because it's of such a scale and it's so optically potent that I find any video or photograph sort of dissatisfying. So I do encourage you all to go to San Francisco and see this piece. The piece was, we were given a 2-year permit by Caltrans because it's an active piece of infrastructure and hundreds of thousands of cars use this every day. So we had to respect that and also to point the lights away from any sort of traffic so we wouldn't distract drivers on the bridge. But we premiered the piece and the story went from local story to national to international. We've had over 1 billion media impressions on the story of the Bay Lights. So it's a incredible thing that happened. We made a 70-minute documentary called Impossible Light, which you all can see. It's online. That tells the nitty-gritty story. We were told repeatedly that this is impossible, you can't do it. But we did. We formed a nonprofit. We raised $8 million, which was very challenging in itself. And we were able to surmount all the technical challenges of working in this intense marine environment with vibration and moisture and all the technological hurdles. But it's something that people in San Francisco really fell in love with. And it's become iconic. It's when you see a sportscast or the news, this is the image that you see. And the Bay the Bay Bridge was always kind of the stepsister bridge that was overlooked by the Golden Gate was the one that got all the attention. So it's been interesting to be able to shift the way people see the Bay Bridge, make them see it in a new way. And it resonates, I think, with the spirit of the Bay Area, and that it unites art and software and light and infrastructure in a way that's very unique. And it's in the spirit of doing the impossible, of debugging, is all part of this artwork. And it took a team of thousands of people to achieve this work. And what was nice is everyone had a sense of ownership, that they participated in making this real. And all our contractors, our electrical contractors, were bringing their kids to see the piece and look what we did. And so it was really a really wonderful thing. And for me, the nicest part is to go down to the Embarcadero in San Francisco and just overhear people's conversations, because people can't help but talk to one another when they see this piece, because it binds people together, and you can't help but talk to the person next to you. So it's literally creating community, and I often describe the Bay Lights as a digital campfire in the way that it draws people together. And it's something that you can look at or not look at. It doesn't demand your attention in the way that a television monitor would draw you and not let you go. This is something that's sort of ambient, and hundreds of thousands of people have the view of the Bay Bridge, but we've won them over. I think it's pretty universally loved. So at the end of 2 years, we had to shut it down on March 5th of last year. A group came together and said, what would it take to make the Bay Lights permanent? So we went through some steps with Caltrans and asked them, and they said, well, if you can raise the money to reinstall it, we'll take ownership of the piece. So we managed to raise an additional $4 million, reinstall the piece, and then on January 30th, we relaunched the Bay Lights as a permanent piece. So now this is permanent, it was very exciting. Thrilling way to see how public art can, it can access, it's universal. We estimated 50 million people would see the piece over 2 years. So it's a huge audience. And people actually travel to San Francisco to see the Bay Lights specifically. And we in order to help with the politicians and people, we did an economic impact study that said that the Bay Lights would conservatively bring $100 million into the local economy. And it really has. I mean, the restaurants and hotels and businesses are up 30%. They love me. I'm a huge rock star when I go there. I'm getting free drinks and all sorts of things. But on many levels, this public art on this scale has an impact. And artists like Chris Do wrote letters of support for us and saw the value of what we were doing and taking on some of the work he had done, but bringing it using technological tools and light in a way that was special. So our hope and my hope is that this can, the Bay Lights can serve as an example of what, for other communities and other artists. And it's really exciting to be able to achieve this. And I guess I feel incredibly grateful and humbled that we were able to get as far as we did with this project. But there it is. And for me, everything isn't about scale. It's not all about huge things, although my team has called the Bay Lights the largest light sculpture in the world. I'm very happy working in my studio and working with galleries and museums and making work that I don't necessarily have to fundraise for or get permits for, and it's refreshing. But it all feeds together, and it's an exciting time, and some of the exposure that the Bay Lights has brought has really propelled my studio forward, and it's exciting to go out into the world and meet people like you all and see what's possible. So anyway, I'm happy to take some questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
You made reference to $4 million to reinstall it. To what degree was it de-installed at the end of your 2 years?
We had to take the piece down completely so that Caltrans could paint the cables. And the main cost with the Bay Lights was in labor. The only way to access the bridge is via a lane closure. So all the work had to be done from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. And every time we did a lane closure, that cost $10,000 because we needed the police cars and the cones and the whole thing. And then our contractors would have to install a kind of a rig that they would be able to go up the cables and install the piece. So very challenging, and with the weather in San Francisco, it can be moist and blowing and complicated. So we had to take it down. The second time around, because of the maintenance that Caltrans was willing to do, that cut the budget down to $4 million. And we worked closely with Philips that re-engineered the entire LED system so that we were able to, it would be more robust and able to handle the harsh conditions up there. Yes?
I thought I heard you say that all the pieces, at least the ones you showed, were random generated in terms of their, have you done any where the environment, people or whatever, changes the display or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's certainly technically possible to use sensors and input from the outside to drive these pieces. And a lot of my early work, my sound pieces did involve interactivity. But I got so involved in sequencing lights that I realized that that's really where I wanted to focus my attention. And the piece I consider interactive in the way that it was made site-specifically and in response to all the kinetic activity around the bridge. So it feels appropriate and for the site. But it's not literally connected to any sensors, and although I wouldn't rule it out moving forward, but I think it's difficult to make a satisfying interactive experience, and oftentimes I think it gets bogged down with a lot of sort of the sensors and not understanding the interactive part, and but I'm not ruling it out. Yes?
If LEDs had not been invented, do you have an alternative?
This is pretty much, no, I don't think so. It requires solid state lighting, which is robust and has a life of up to 100,000 hours. And that 100,000 hours is 11 and a half years if you were to burn it straight through at full power. But because we're modulating the light levels, that extends the life even further. And it's on only in the evening from dusk until dawn, so that extends the life as well. And another important thing is that we estimated that the bay lights for 25,000 lights uses less than $30 a night in electricity. So it's in the Bay Area, I think everywhere, it's important that it is sustainable, but you can make major pieces like this that have a very minimal impact. Yes, over here.
This is an amazing project that you did. I'm glad you're in Wichita talking about it. I want to make sure I heard what you said. Did I hear 8 million plus an additional 4 million?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, it was 8 the first time and then another 4. And the 8 was, we found unbelievable donors, and it was all privately funded, people who were willing to do something that, because no one really knew. They saw my rendering, and I guess they sort of trusted me. But to get behind something like the Bay Lights, which was a temporary piece, it's only up for 2 years, and it's very different. The vision to do that. We found some unbelievably generous people in the Bay Area who, one donor gave us a challenge of 3.5 million, and we had to raise the other 3.5. But it was this unfolding, and we also were able to, as I lived in the Bay Area in the early 90s, I had a community of old friends and people involved in tech and all sorts of things, and there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how we got some of the tech entrepreneurs involved in supporting art, and a lot of them were involved in the Bay Lights. So I think that's a good thing for all artists to get them involved.
Is it continually being funded by private?
Well, now that it's installed, we're going to hand it over actually on the 30th of this month to the state of California. So they're going to maintain it, which is wonderful, and takes a big load off us because they already have the trucks and the guys who go out there and maintain the bridge. So this just gets rolled into that. Yes, back here.
I've been back and forth with the tunnel at the National Gallery several times. I love that. But you mentioned that it's run by a computer program. And I'm wondering if the computer program ever breaks down, because my own personal computer breaks down.
That's a great question, and I have a really fantastic team of programmers, and we work very hard on, I believe if I'm going to make art that you have to plug in, that it has to be something that's robust and can, survive for the long haul. But it is something that's technological. We have not had any problem ever at the National Gallery, and that piece has been up for a good long time. So the software is very robust. We generally we have backup computers. We have all sorts of things in case something happens. So we've thought about all the possible things that could occur. And I think for me, I've had many meetings with, the Museum of Modern Art has one of my pieces, and we met with their team of new media conservators to think about the work. And I also did a piece in a federal courthouse in El Paso, Texas. So the GSA hosted a workshop on maintaining the pieces and what is the piece. So what our conclusion was that the pieces are the code, the software that displays the sequences combined with light. So if we preserve the code, then we also know the lights, the type of LED lights we were using and all the specifications on them. Then 100 years down the road, these pieces could be recreated when that need arises. But my goal is to just create a very solid archive and anticipate all these conditions so my work can live on. Yes?
So you talked about that you have 12 commissions in the upcoming year, and so I'd like to hear about those commissions and what they might consist of and how they might be configured.
Sure.
That's a big question.
We're working all over the U.S. and internationally now. So it's very exciting. We just did a piece in Chicago and another piece in San Francisco. Different scale pieces, and some are indoors and in commercial lobbies. Others are with museums. I also do exhibitions, but I'm working in Auckland, in New Zealand. We're doing some work in Korea. But at this point, I'm trying to build my team, which is what you need in order to be able to do projects like this. So having a good team of producers and people that can take things off my plate, because I have to stay focused on the art and having the vision of what could it be, staying inspired, and staying involved, obviously, in running the studio. But I'm traveling pretty much constantly, which is nice. But it's sort of finding a balance, and I think what I've concluded is I want to work with nice people in places I want to be, and that's sort of the challenge, is in finding people who understand that what I'm doing is art. Some people ask me, they want to commission one of my light shows, and I say, okay, stop right there. I don't make light shows. I mean, with respect, and this is something different because it's using a pop material on the LED, but using it in a way as an artistic material, which makes it different. So there's a lot of new and exciting opportunities, but expanding that in a way, and it's really it feels wide open and very new. Yeah.
What about the Golden Gate Bridge?
Well, I've been asked about the Golden Gate, and I'm not quite sure if they're ready for me to do something there, but we've been discussing the eastern span of the Bay Bridge, which is a brand new section. There was always a plan to put a line of light between Treasure Island and Oakland. So that's something that could potentially happen, but these things take a long time, and you have to really be tenacious and be ready to spend years and years and years going through these processes of permits and meetings and et cetera. But in the end, you get to do big, enormous things out in the world that millions of people can see. So for me, it's very much worthwhile. Yes, over here.
Would you speak to what is the structure that you use to build a strong and resilient studio team? How big is the studio team? How do you find and keep them also well invested in your work?
Right. Well, we have 4 people right now in the studio and looking to fill that out, and many others on, as needed. We have many metal fabricators, electrical engineers. Besides working with Philips, as I showed here, I develop a lot of my own technology. So we make our own LED boards, printed circuit boards, control systems, software. So from the ground up, we're making it ourselves, which is exciting at some points, but at other times, it can be a headache, because when it's not working and the firmware needs to be debugged, there's no one to call. We get to call ourselves, and so there's a lot of that, which I have to kind of manage and make sure that we aren't doing that, the night before a show opens. But we've had some intense experiences. I think at this point we like to work with time and plan things out and do things so that when we come and install something, it feels almost like a magic trick, and we just did it, and boom, it happened. So we worked everything out off-site and know it's going to work, because we have many challenges engineering-wise in terms of the structure, and we just hung a 14,000-pound sculpture in a lobby in Chicago, and these things are complicated. So you need very good engineers, very good people in order to do these things. But finding partners and who you want to work with is the other challenge. But I think we're all doing it together, and I think there's a real sense of satisfaction in trying to make sure people don't get burned out is the other thing to watch. And you know, yeah, it's a team effort. Yes?
You do a lot of very large-scale objects and artwork. Do you ever consider doing things that individuals could purchase for their own?
Absolutely, and I do. And I've had many exhibitions at Sandra Gehring's gallery, and I love I've even made editions that you can wear, you can hold in your hand. So handheld things, and it's not all about large scale. But and you learn some things on big pieces that you can bring back to small pieces, and things you can make on a smaller scale that can apply. So it's a back and forth. So I have these different paths through my work. One which would be architectural commissions, other which is gallery exhibitions and shows in museums. So it varies, but yes, Sandra can certainly help you, right, Sandra?
What galleries?
Yes.
Are you at all interested in adding sound to your sculptures?
I've thought a lot about sound. Some of my early pieces were using sound. And I was in an exhibition many years ago at the Hirshhorn in Washington, D.C. called Visual Music. And that show traveled to L.A. MoCA. And the show started with artists like Kandinsky and traced this path through abstraction to the present. And I think the reason why the curators wanted me in the show was because my work had a synesthetic aspect. We're almost remapping the senses, where you can almost see sound when you look at my pieces. And a lot of my compositional methods were very similar to the way a musician would make sound. So I haven't worked directly with sound. Again, I wouldn't rule it out. But I've worked with some musicians to create soundtracks for shows and done some collaborations, which are very interesting. But I'm finding my own way through that. But light is my medium for now.
Where did you?
One more, sorry.
What happens in those beautiful places that you build, like at Madison Avenue, and they decommission the piece of Crystal Bridges? What happens to that beautiful space? Are you talking to New York City to do something else, or?
At Madison Square Park, after the pieces leave?
Yeah.
Well,
The area is so beautiful.
Yeah.
It's gotta be a really-
People miss my work. They really do. It feels like, and I miss it. I walk by there and I feel like, something's missing.
Right.
But it's all about, that the space is about rotating work and not being permanent.
So there is other things that go in there.
Yes, and it has a lot of integrity. The art program there is really incredible, so I feel very honored to be part of that history. Yeah. Yep.
You've had such great success with the existing structures at the National Gallery and the Bay Bridge. Are you currently working on the development stage with any architects or builders on projects, or something that would be a permanent installation from the beginning?
Yes, and that's very exciting because you can really plan for where we put the wiring and get deeply integrated with the architects, and that's thrilling to be able to do, because I like things to feel like they were always meant to be there and not added on later. So the earlier you can get in on that process, the more exciting it is. But we've worked with many architects, and
Could you give us any examples?
Sure, we're working on a big piece with David Chipperfield in Korea. For Amore Pacific. It's a cosmetic company, and Chipperfield is a wonderful architect. He's doing an addition to the Metropolitan Museum in New York right now, and he did the Figge Museum in Davenport, Iowa. Beautiful buildings. So we were able to start very early on in integrating the pieces into that, but that's going to take another 2 or 3 years to appear. Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for coming.